Long before games like Animal Crossing kept you shackled to an endless cycle of artificial responsibilities for fear of upsetting your animal residents or incurring the wrath of Tom Nook and the raccoon mob for non-payment of debts, the 1990s gave us a similarly absurd but unbelievably addictive digital world in the form of the Tamagotchi. I was 19 when these things appeared, and I was fascinated by their arrival. These little bleeping, booping, egg-shaped things that seemed to come straight out of nowhere and were soon dangling from the keyrings of every kid you encountered. They were an addiction, pure and simple, but just as quickly as they arrived, they disappeared, and the legacy they left as digital creatures with communities you could cultivate would endure for decades to come and reshape the face of computerized entertainment. Now, silly trends in trivial things are nothing new, especially in America. I was a child of the 80s, and we had our fair share of silly gimmicks that somehow caught on and made a bundle, with future archivists and social historians wondering how in the world they ever did. Take the pet rock, perhaps the laziest but also most brilliant marketing ploy ever devised. It was a rock with googly eyes. That's it. Yet American kids bought them up like they were the last toys ever made. And how about the chia pet? Remember them?
Chia.
All you were doing was cultivating a chia plant, but because it was attached to something that vaguely resembled an animal, it was now your very own pet that you could love and grow. I myself had a chia kitten. It died. Hey, just because I'm a girl doesn't mean I'm automatically good at horticulture. Anyway, by the mid-1990s, when the west coast of the United States was humming with dial-up modems that squealed and clicked before finally surrendering a connection, it seemed only natural that the next new trend that would dominate the youth would be digital, and having dominated the motor industry and the home appliances and electronics market, where else could it have come from but Japan? It looked harmless enough at first glance, like the kind of keychain trinket that might end up lost under couch cushion. But it came with a tiny world inside it, and an unspoken contract. Pay attention, or suffer the consequences. The Tamagotchi was conceived in Tokyo by Akihiro Yokoi and Aki Maeda as a digital pet that could be carried anywhere. A creature that lived, grew, misbehaved, and occasionally died based on the care it received. The idea sat at the crossroads of late 20th century anxieties and optimism. Urban living that made real pets impractical. A fascination with portable technology that was becoming smaller and more personal each year, and a playful belief that responsibility could be learned through pixels and beeps. Even the name, drawn from the Japanese words for egg and watch, hinted at what it was meant to be, a living thing you kept close, something you checked the way you checked the time. Originally imagined as something worn on the wrist, it instead emerged as an egg-shaped handheld companion, both mysterious and comforting, a tiny promise that something alive was waiting inside, wiggling in grayscale, ready to hatch into a creature that somehow felt like it belonged to you. When the Tamagotchi debuted in Japan in late 1996, it caused a sensation that rippled across the Pacific almost immediately. The way certain pop culture waves seem to travel faster than airplanes. Stories of shortages and frantic purchases floated across magazines, early internet forums, and word of mouth, giving the toy an aura before most American kids had even seen one in person. By May 1997, it reached American shores, landing first in toy stores and electronic shops along the West Coast, where trends often arrived early, were tried loudly, and then exported eastward, like cultural weather. In California, Oregon, and Washington, Tamagotchis began appearing clipped to Jansport backpacks, jangling from belt loops, dangling from keyrings, and tucked into hoodie pockets like contraband candy. They showed up at bus stops in the fog, in school hallways that smelled faintly of pencil shavings and cafeteria pizza, and in the palm of a kid standing in line at a movie theater, thumb hovering over 3 tiny buttons. Silicon Valley parents recognized the digital logic of it and the way it made caregiving feel like a system with rules. Some saw it as a harmless toy that taught routine, while others suspected it was just another screen sneaking into childhood. Hollywood, always hungry for the cute and collectible, embraced its novelty, and kids simply heard the beeps and responded with the pure reflex of curiosity. At around $18 a unit, it wasn't cheap, but it was just affordable enough to become the object of birthday wishes, allowance hoarding, babysitting savings, and playground negotiations that could grow surprisingly intense. One child might trade a stack of Pokemon cards Another might offer up a favorite action figure, and some would simply plead until an adult gave in. Stores struggled to keep them in stock, and rumors spread quickly about which mall, which Kmart, which Toys R Us, or which little independent shop near the freeway might still have a shipment left behind the counter. In an era before constant online inventory checks, the chase itself became part of the thrill. Car rides to distant shopping centers, calls made from kitchen wall phones, and the electric rush of finding one at last, as if the egg were less a toy than a prize. What the West Coast discovered almost immediately was that the Tamagotchi was not a toy you could ignore, not even for long. It did not patiently wait for free time like a board game on a shelf. Once the egg hatched, the creature demanded feeding, cleaning, play, and discipline on its own schedule, not the owner's, and it did so with a persistence that felt almost mischievous. It beeped during math class in Oakland, chirped in the middle of silent reading time in Portland, and announced itself in the bleachers at Little League practice in San Diego. It complained during long car rides up Highway 101, right when the driver finally found the perfect stretch of open road, and it seemed to wake up at the least convenient moments, as if it understood exactly when attention would be hardest to give. Kids learned the rhythms of hunger meters and happiness meters, of training and discipline, of tiny digital droppings that needed cleaning and skull icons that signaled illness. They learned that snacks could make a pet happy, but also make it sick, that ignoring the mess could turn a cheerful creature into a miserable one, and that pressing the wrong button in a hurry could feel like a personal failure. Forgetting about the pet for half a day could mean death, and death was permanent enough to feel real, especially to children for whom even losing a favorite toy could feel like tragedy. The moment of loss was oddly theatrical, a little grave marker or angelic symbol on a screen, a final stillness where there had been bouncing life, and a guilty awareness that the pet hadn't vanished randomly, but because someone hadn't shown up. On the West Coast, where school districts were already experimenting with technology bans, and teachers were tired of anything that competed with pencils and chalkboards, Tamagotchis were quickly confiscated, outlawed, and smuggled back in like miniature troublemakers. They were hidden in desks, stashed in sock drawers inside backpacks, muted under sweaters, or handed to sympathetic parents at work who agreed to feed them during the day, as if the digital pet were joining the broader economy of after-school childcare. In some homes, the Tamagotchi became a family responsibility, without anyone admitting it out loud, passed from sibling to sibling, checked before dinner, tended to before bedtime, and carried into the day with a faint anxiety that it might beep again at any moment, demanding proof that its tiny life still mattered. By late 1997 and into 1998, the Tamagotchi had crossed from novelty into obsession. And on the West Coast, that shift happened in a way that felt both inevitable and a little wild. In the same regions where new music scenes, new slang, and new skate shoes could spread from one campus to the next, in a matter of days, a beeping plastic egg suddenly became the most important item a kid could clip to a backpack zipper. Schoolyards from San Diego up through Los Angeles, the Bay Area, and into Portland and Seattle developed their own tiny economies and social systems around the devices. There were informal hierarchies that had nothing to do with height, grades, or athletic ability, and everything to do with shell color, rarity, and survival time. A translucent or glittery casing could draw a crowd. A kid who managed to raise an admired character and keep it alive for an unusually long stretch could gain the kind of respect that usually took an entire semester to earn. The Tamagotchi's characters, rendered in simple pixel art, became oddly familiar figures in everyday conversation. Almost like classmates who didn't attend school but somehow mattered anyway. Mamechi, in particular, took on the status of a minor celebrity, a small mascot of competence and good care. Even kids who insisted they were too cool for the craze knew the names and recognized the silhouettes. The beeps and jingles became a kind of background music to late 1990s youth culture, punctuating afternoons at the food court, weekends at soccer games, and long waits in carpool lines. It wasn't unusual to see a cluster of kids huddled together, not trading baseball cards or arguing about a video game console, but comparing growth stages, debating the best way to balance hunger and happiness, and swapping whispered tips about discipline and mini-games. If one device chirped, several hands would instinctively dive into pockets at once, like a synchronized reflex. At home, the toy's grip spread beyond its intended audience. Some families found themselves unexpectedly attached, in part because the Tamagotchi demanded attention on a schedule that rarely matched a child's actual day. When school rules tightened and teachers confiscated devices, the pet's needs didn't stop, which created a new kind of domestic negotiation. Parents who might have rolled their eyes at the purchase often became caretakers out of sheer practicality, feeding a digital creature during a lunch break in downtown Los Angeles or sneaking a quick check between calls at an office in Seattle. More than a few households developed a routine in which the Tamagotchi was handed off in the morning the way a lunchbox might be, with last-minute instructions and a warning not to let it get sick. Siblings fought over who was responsible when a pet died, while others insisted it was unfair because the beeping had happened during a math test, or because a teacher had taken it away for no reason. Stories spread the way West Coast rumors always did. Fast, dramatic, and slightly improved with every retelling. Someone's cousin in Sacramento had a pet that lived forever. A friend's older sister in Santa Cruz supposedly knew a pause trick that made it easier to keep a pet alive during school hours. Kids compared death ages the way they compared scores, and survival became a badge of honor. Some owners were proud of strict, careful routines. Others became notorious for indulgence, feeding too many snacks in search of a happier meter, only to end up with sickness and frantic medicine button mashing. The emotional stakes, strange as it sounded to adults, were real to the kids holding those tiny screens. A death wasn't just a reset, it felt like a failure of responsibility, especially because the device had been designed to make neglect obvious and consequences immediate. At the same time, criticism rose in volume, and the West Coast, with its long tradition of both embracing and worrying about technology, provided plenty of concerned voices. Teachers complained about constant interruptions and the way a single beep could derail an entire classroom's attention. Administrators debated bans in the same tone they used for more serious issues, as if the toy were an emerging threat rather than a fad. Parents worried aloud about distraction and emotional dependence, about children building a bond with something that wasn't alive, yet seemed to demand caretaking as if it were. Some adults were unsettled by the idea that kids were learning grief, guilt, and responsibility from a screen the size of a postage stamp, especially when tears and genuine mourning followed a death animation. Others saw it as harmless practice, like a training wheel version of compassion, even if the lesson arrived through pixels and beep codes. Just as suddenly as it arrived, the craze burned out, and the shift was so quick it felt like the weather turning. By the end of 1998, toy bins were full. The most coveted shell colors were no longer worth bargaining over, and the same kids who had once treated their Tamagotchis like fragile living things began to leave them in backpacks until the batteries died. Many devices ended their days in drawers beneath old birthday cards, in the backseat cracks of family minivans, or in the washing machine after being forgotten in a pair of jeans. The hard plastic shells survived what their digital pets could not, rattling around in household clutter as quiet evidence of a year when everything seemed to beep. Bandai itself was left with warehouses of unsold units and a sharp lesson in how quickly hype could outrun supply, especially when demand had been fueled by scarcity and social pressure as much as by the product's actual novelty. On the West Coast, the Tamagotchi became a memory almost overnight, bundled together with slap bracelets, Beanie Babies, Pogs, and other artifacts of a decade that moved fast and left clutter behind in bedroom corners and garage boxes. Yet the impression lingered in a way that many adults only recognized later. For those who grew up there, the Tamagotchi was often the first experience of constant connectivity, not through the internet, but through obligation. It trained kids to anticipate a device's needs, to keep it close, to respond immediately when it demanded attention, and to feel uneasy when it was out of reach. Long after the craze faded, the habit of checking, tending, and responding remained familiar, almost like muscle memory. In hindsight, that little egg-shaped toy didn't just reflect the 1990s, it rehearsed the future, teaching a generation what it felt like to carry a small digital life around all day and quietly rearrange one's routine around its blinking, beeping demands. Years later, when Bandai revived the Tamagotchi with new versions and new technology, it was nostalgia that powered much of the interest, especially in California and other coastal states where the original adopters were now adults with paychecks, apartments, and a lingering soft spot for the toys that once ran their afternoons. The revival didn't feel like a brand new craze dropping out of nowhere so much as a familiar tune drifting out of a car window. instantly recognizable, slightly embarrassing, and impossible not to hum along with. On the West Coast, where pop culture cycles move quickly and yesterday's trends are always waiting for their next cameo, the Tamagotchi's return fit neatly into a broader wave of looking back. Old cartoons were streaming again, vintage sneakers were back on feet. And suddenly, the idea of carrying a little digital creature didn't seem ridiculous so much as comforting, even funny in a self-aware way. Millennials who had once hidden pets under their desks or cupped them in their hands like contraband during class found themselves buying new ones, ironically, usually with a grin and a shrug, as if to say it was just a joke, just a throwback, just a silly little desk companion. Some picked them up at big box stores on a whim during a Target run. Others hunted down special colors online the way they once hunted rumors of new shipments at the mall. People clipped them to keys again, placed them beside laptops, or let them sit in the cup holder during commutes up the 405, the 101, or I-5, half expecting them to stay quiet this time. But then the old habits returned, not all at once, but in little moments that added up. A quick check between emails, a reflexive button press while waiting for coffee, the mild panic when the sound chirped at the wrong time, followed by the relief of realizing, oh right, it's just hungry. The beeps still worked, that bright little insistence cutting through whatever else was happening, and it did something oddly powerful. It made grown people pause. The attachment still formed, even when they told themselves it wouldn't. The Tamagotchi still had that sneaky way of turning pixels into personality. Owners found themselves assigning moods and motives to a dot-eyed creature, interpreting its little animations like facial expressions, feeling a flicker of pride when it evolved into a desirable adult character, and a flicker of guilt when it got sick because they'd been busy. It wasn't that anyone truly believed it was alive, yet the routines pulled at the same part of the brain that had once made a kid sprint home from school to check on a pet that might not have survived the afternoon. The ironic purchase became a small ritual, and the ritual became a tiny relationship. In a world where so much technology was sleek, silent, and automated, the Tamagotchi's blunt neediness felt strangely human. In retrospect, the Tamagotchi started to look less like a fad and more like a prototype, an early hint of the always-on digital companions that would define the next decades. It had demanded attention in short, persistent bursts the way notifications would later do. It had blurred the line between play and obligation, the way social apps and daily streaks and endless feeds would later blur it. It had taught users to live with a low-grade sense of something needs me, and to organize their day around a device that did not care about their schedule. Long before people checked their phones first thing in the morning, plenty of West Coast kids had checked a little egg-shaped screen, half asleep, just to make sure no disaster had occurred overnight. When the Tamagotchi returned, that parallel became even clearer. People laughed at how familiar the compulsion felt, then caught themselves doing it again anyway. Looking back from the present, the Tamagotchi's grip on West Coast youth in the 1990s feels both quaint and prophetic, like a snapshot from an era that didn't realize it was rehearsing the future. The device was tiny, the graphics were basic, and the whole thing ran on a few buttons and a simple screen. Yet it managed to be more demanding than a lot of bigger entertainment. It was simple, but not passive. It was demanding, but also rewarding. It was unforgiving in a way that now seems almost shocking, because the pet could actually die, and it didn't always feel fair. That harshness was part of what made it stick. A kid could ignore a toy dinosaur and come back to it later. A Tamagotchi punished neglect with consequences, and in doing so, it made the care feel meaningful. Yet it was endlessly charming, too. The little creature's life stages turned time into a story, an egg that wiggled, a baby that needed everything, a teenager that tested patience, an adult that reflected the quality of the care it received. That arc created the illusion of growth, which made owners feel like they were part of something bigger than a quick game. It taught a generation that even the smallest screen could hold something worth caring about, and that responsibility could arrive unannounced, beep loudly, and fit in the palm of your hand. On the West Coast, where kids already lived in a swirl of new media, the Tamagotchi slipped right into daily life, bridging the gap between toys and technology with almost no effort belongs on the user's part. It was portable enough to travel everywhere, but needy enough to make every wear feel like it had one more obligation tucked into it. For many, it wasn't just a toy. It was a tiny life that briefly owned them, a pocket-sized boss that trained them to check in, to respond, to soothe and fix and maintain. It created memories that still carry a sting. The heartbreak of coming home to an angel or a grave marker, the embarrassment of a beep going off at the worst moment, the quiet pride of keeping a pet alive longer than anyone else in class. It also created a kind of shared language, a West Coast childhood shorthand, where someone could mention a Tamagotchi and immediately unlock a whole set of sensory details. The click of the buttons, the chain against a zipper pull, the frantic search for a replacement battery, the way a friend would offer to babysit during a long class or a family road trip. And it became a reminder that the digital future began not with smartphones, but with an egg that needed to be fed. Before constant connectivity had a name, before notifications became a fact of life, plenty of kids in California, Oregon, and Washington had already experienced the feeling of being tethered to a device by a thin thread of responsibility and affection. The Tamagotchi was a small thing, but it proved something big, that a simple, persistent companion could be enough to shape habits, emotions, and routines. In that sense, the toy didn't just predict the next era. It practiced it, one beep at a time.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 1 9 on X, we're here just for you.